Initial management of burns. I'm a graduate of St. Medical College, batch of 2009. The outline of my talk would be, I will talk about burns in general, then I will classify them, I will describe the types of burns and their management in detail. A burn is an injury caused by heat, electrical current, radiation to the skin, even the respiratory damage done by the smoke is also called burns. Burns are the fourth leading cause of injury following road traffic accident, falls, and interpersonal violence worldwide. It accounts for 5 to 12% of all injuries worldwide. A burn injury is caused when there is thermal insult on the skin that leads to acute changes in the composition of the skin. It kills cells, it denatures proteins, and caused injury. Initially, burn depth is based on two factors, the intensity of heat, duration of contact. The longer the duration of contact of skin with the source, the deeper the burn would be. The hotter the source or the longer the duration of contact, the deeper the burn injury would be. In the area of direct thermal injury, what happens is the cellular and protein, the cellular and matrix proteins are irreversibly damaged. Cytokines such as like interleukin-1, interleukin-8, and tumor necrosis factor alpha are released. They cause secondary reaction and local cellular death. There is loss of endothelial vascular integrity. There is migration of leukocytes, and there is complement activation that leads to activation of inflammatory process. This area of inflammation causes decreased tissue perfusion and converts the burn wounds from smaller superficial injuries to larger, deeper wounds. At this point, I would like to emphasize that with appropriate resuscitation and local wound care, we can limit the reversible tissue loss, and this is the goal of initial burn care. How would we classify burns? There are three degrees of burns. The superficial burns, which is called the first degree burn. They affect the epidermis only. They are dry. There is only erythema. They blanch with pressure, and they are painful. There is no blistering or ulceration on the skin. The most common example is the sunburn. They usually heal on their own. No further management is needed, and there is no systemic inflammatory response. They do not require resuscitation, and they can be managed as an outpatient with adequate analgesia. Then the second degree burn, they are classified as partial thickness and deep partial thickness. The superficial partial thickness burns are limited to the upper layer of the dermis. They presents with blistering, and when these blisters are unroofed, you will find the pink, moist, edematous underlying skin that blanches on pressure. The deep partial thickness burns extends into the deep dermis. They are whiter. They have variable degrees of sensation and edema. They do not blanch on pressure, and they do not exhibit capillary refill. They sometimes require excision and skin graft. Then the full thickness burn, also called third degree burns, they are dry, leathery, and the skin is contracted. They are insensate, and they can be brown, black, white, or dark red in color. There is no moisture or exudate. You can see thrombosed vessels visible through the translucent dermis. These full thickness burns always require excision and graft to achieve wound closure. Otherwise, they will, if you leave them to heal on their own, they will lead to significant deformities like contractures. Then there is another degree of burn, which is called fourth degree burn. When the full thickness burn is combined with involvement of bones, skin, bones, muscles, and tendons, then it is called fourth degree burn. These are usually electrical burns. So, talking about the management of burn. The management of burn is not a single person's job. It is a multidisciplinary team approach. Who should be the part of this multidisciplinary team? A burn surgeon, which is vital for the management of burn wounds. A critical care physician, also very important for the management of burn shock, multiple system failure, and organ dysfunction associated with larger burns. A reconstructive surgeon that will manage the deformities resulting from burn scars. Trained burn nurses, they are very, very important for daily burn wound dressing changes. Physical and occupational therapist, who will manage the functional disabilities and limit contracture formation. They will fabricate splints for patients. Clinical nutritionist, they will assess the caloric requirement of the patients. Then clinical psychologists, they will manage the psychosocial factors associated with burn injuries. And the pharmacist, who will manage drug dosing and interactions. Each member of the team is equally important. Like any other trauma, burn is also a trauma. The management starts with ABCs, the management of airway, breathing, circulation. In addition to that, determination of burn depth and escharotomies. The airway should be assessed for signs of inhalational injury. We will talk about it later on in detail. Circulation should be assessed. The blood pressures should be taken. Pulse should be recorded. Full and detailed history should be obtained to determine the etiology of the injury. Usually the patient is not in the condition to talk. You should take the history from the bystanders or the person who brought the patient to the hospital. We should ask about the medical comorbidities. Any medicines patient is taking. Tetanus immunization status should be assessed, and if not given previously, they should be given tetanus prophylaxis. The most important part is determination of burn wound depth. There are Jackson described 3 zones of thermal injury: the zone of coagulation, zone of stasis, and the zone of hyperemia. The zone of coagulation is in that direct contact with the burn source, and it is irreversibly damaged. It is the zone of stasis and the zone of hyperemia which we can prevent with adequate resuscitation. The zone of hyperemia is the outermost zone. The zone of stasis is the middle zone. The most important method of assessment is clinical method. You can it comes with experience. You can see the pink color. The pink color of the burn wound is the superficial wound. The white color is the partial thickness, superficial, and the deep burn. And this brown color is full thickness burn. This comes with experience. Other method of assessment are ultrasound assessment of the burn scar, laser Doppler imaging, and the intravenous fluorescent imaging. Assessment of the burn size. The most commonly used method is the rules of 9. Then there is Lund and Browder chart, and Palmer method. It is a crude method. In rules of 9, each area of the body is represented by 9%. Limbs are given 9%. Both limbs, each limb is given 9%. Each upper limb is given 9%. The torso is given 18% from the front, 18% from the back, and the head is given 4.5%. And the perineum represents 1% of the body surface area. Lund and Browder chart is more accurate. As you can see, it has a representation of each part of the body individually, and it also differentiates the age of the patient as well. It is different from age 0 to 1 year, 1 to 4 year, 5 to 9 years, and it is different for adult. The Palmer method is a crude method. You can use the palm of the patient, not the clinician, to assess the total body surface area burn. The palm represents 1% of the body surface area. Principles of management. There are 5 principles of management of each burn: the local wound care, analgesia, hydration, nutrition, and physical therapy. Local wound care involves removal of all the burn clothes from the patient's body, transfer of the patient to a safe place, and covering the wounds with appropriate dressings. The most commonly used dressing is the paraffin gauze dressing, but nowadays silver alginate dressings are also available. We can also use that for stable wounds. The advantage of paraffin gauze dressing is it is easily available, it is cheap, and you can use them for unstable burn wounds, which you need to review daily. The silver alginate dressings can be are applied for a longer period of time. They continue to they continue their activity for around 7 days, but they are expensive. Patients should be given adequate analgesia. Opioids are the main analgesics which we can give to these patients. For breakthrough pain, we can also use opioids. NSAIDs are usually avoided because burn patients are prone to gastric ulcers, and they tend to gastrointestinal bleeding. Hydration, which is very, very important. We will talk about it in detail. Nutritionally, we should take care about these patients. For smaller ones, the patient can tolerate enteral feed, but for larger ones, we can put patients on nasogastric feeding. Physical therapy should be started for patients who are having burn wounds to limbs or across the joint surfaces. Otherwise, they will have joint stiffness or can lead to contracture formation. As per American Burn Association criteria, burns greater than 20% total body surface area in adults or greater than 10% in a child should be admitted to ICU for hemodynamic monitoring and resuscitation. They require placement of a central venous line, an arterial line, a Foley's catheter to monitor urine output, and a nasogastric tube to start and feeding. This is the American Burn Association criteria for burn center referral, which includes any patient who's having partial thickness burn greater than 10% total body surface area, burns that involve the face, hand, feet, genitalia, perineum, or major joints regardless of the area burn, third-degree burns in any age group, electrical burns including lightning injury, chemical burns, inhalational injury, burn injury in patients with pre-existing medical disorders, any patients with burns and concomitant trauma. Sometimes these patients fall after having a burn injury, and they have fractures and other spine injuries, so they should be admitted. Burn children in hospitals without qualified personnel or equipment for the care of children. If these patients do not have anybody at home to look after them, then you should admit them. Burn injury in patients who will require spatial, social, emotional, or rehabilitative intervention like geriatrics, pediatric patients, you need to admit them. Resuscitation, this is very, very important. As we mentioned previously, with the adequate resuscitation, we can limit the area of burn, the zone of stasis and the zone of hyperemia. Otherwise, they will lead to irreversible damage. All the resuscitation formulas are based on the patient's initial weight and the size of the burn. There are many formulas, but the most commonly used is the Parkland formula, which is 4 cc into weight in kg into percentage total body surface area. Half of this fluid, calculated fluid, is given in the first 8 hours, and the rest is given in the next 16 hours. One should monitor the urine output of the patient. If the resuscitation is adequate, you can continue with that, and if there is decreased urine output, you can give additional fluid boluses. Which fluid to give for a resuscitation? The best fluid to give in a burns patient is isotonic crystalloid solutions such as Ringer lactate, as they limit diffusion into the interstitial space. Normal saline is not given because it provides excessive chloride and can lead to metabolic acidosis. Colloids are not given in the first 24 hours because the capillaries are leaky and the protein will go into the interstitial space, and it will also take fluid with them, and it will aggravate edema and there will be no advantage of giving fluid. Children should be given glucose as they are having little glucose reserve, and we should alternate glucose drips with ringer lactate. The goals of resuscitation in burns is to maintain a urine output of 0.5 ml to 1 ml per kg per hour, and the mean arterial pressure is greater than 65 millimeter mercury. The main target of us is to maintain a urine output of 0.5 to 1 ml of urine per kg per hour. If patient is not forming urine, then you should give additional fluid boluses. There are different formulas to calculate nutrition in a burns patient. There is Curare formula and the Harris-Benedict formula. The Curare formula differs for children and adults. You can see Curare formula for adults. It is 25 kilocalories into weight plus 40 kilocalories into percentage total body surface area. For children, it is 60 kilocalories into weight in kg plus 35 kilocalories into percentage total body surface area. The Harris-Benedict formula provides an estimate of basal energy expenditure. It is different for men and women. Then the calculated basal energy expenditure is multiplied by an injury factor, which is 2.1 for patients with larger burns, to provide an estimate of caloric requirements. Patients with normal renal function should receive 2 grams of protein per kilogram per day. This is very important because these patients are undergoing a catabolic phase due to injury, and their protein requirement should be met with care. The monitoring of nutrition is very, very important. We can count calories daily. We should measure blood glucose levels regularly during the intensive care admission, and we should send a 24-hour total urea nitrogen, and weekly we should see C-reactive proteins, albumins, pre-albumins, vitamin C levels, and the weight of the patient should be measured daily. Chemical burns, they are different from thermal burns because the acids cause coagulative necrosis and the alkalis cause liquefaction. Include to remove all shoes that have been contaminated, irrigate the contact area with regular tap water for minimum of 15 minutes. There's no need to neutralize the chemical. Otherwise, they will cause exothermic reaction and they will further damage the tissues. If there is ocular injury with the chemical burn, the eyes should be washed copiously. There is one exception to this rule. All chemical burns should be washed copiously and the chemical should be removed. One exception to this rule is hydrofluoric acid, which should be neutralized with calcium gluconate or calcium chloride. Otherwise, they will continue to damage the tissues until they come in contact with the bone. Electrical burns, they are very, very devastating. These burns can take several forms, including injury from the electrical current itself, flash burns, flame burns, contact burns, or a combination of both. Additionally, they are associated with other injuries as well, with spine injuries, head injuries, and a thermal injury to the skin. These are classified into low voltage or high voltage. Low voltage injuries are less than 1000 volts, and the high voltage injury is greater than 1000 volts. The mechanism of electrical injury is electricity travels along the path of least resistance, which in human body is the tissue with the highest content of water. Bone has the highest resistance, followed by fat, tendon, skin, muscle, blood vessels, and nerve. Management of these injuries include following the ATLS protocol, Assess the patient's airway, breathing, and circulation. Once stabilized, ascertain the circumstances surrounding the injury, the voltage of the injuring current, whether it was low voltage or a high voltage, whether there was loss of consciousness at the scene, other associated injuries like fall from the height, or whether there was a cardiac or respiratory arrest at the scene. Estimate the total body surface area burn if there was a flame burn or there is the cutaneous element to the electrical injury. Determine the neurovascular status of the injured extremities. All patients who sustain electrical injuries should have an ECG in the electric emergency room. Patients with low voltage injury who had no loss of consciousness, no dysrhythmias, they can be discharged home. Patients with high voltage injuries should be admitted in the ICU. They should be having cardiac monitoring for the first 24 hours. If there are extensive cutaneous burns, then the Parkland formula is applied and fluid administration is titrated to achieve a urine output of 30 cc per hour. If myoglobinuria is present, IV fluid should be titrated to a goal urine output of 100 cc per hour until the urine clears. We do not apply Parkland over here. The goal of our resuscitation in these patients is to get a urine output of 100 cc per hour until the urine clears. The one important component in electrical burn injuries is that they are associated with high tightening of limb compartments. So the emergent fasciotomy should be done to release compartments. Otherwise, the underlying muscles, vessels, or the nerves may get necrosed. Debridement of necrotic tissue is a most important part of management of burns, but in electrical burns, we should wait till the area of necrosis is demarcated, which is by 3rd or 5th day. Late effects of burn injury. One point I would like to emphasize on this, while doing fasciotomy, do not expose the underlying vessel, nerves, or tendons. The late effects of burn injury include hypertrophic scarring, Marjolin ulcer, which is the malignant degeneration in the burn scar, heterotopic ossification, that is calcification in the soft tissues. Inhalational injury, which is very devastating. It can lead to serious morbidity or even mortality. Inhalation of the products of combustion can lead to pulmonary injury. It is divided into supraglottic and subglottic component. The supraglottic component is due to inhalation of breathing of hot air. It leads to edema of the supraglottic epithelium. Then the subglottic component is due to toxic fumes inhaled by the patient. It leads to pulmonary injuries similar to ARDS. Carbon monoxide inhalation is very devastating since carbon monoxide binds to hemoglobin and interferes with the delivery of oxygen. Diagnosis of inhalational injury. One should suspect inhalational injury from the history. If the patient or the attendants are giving you history of burn in a closed space, you should suspect inhalational injury. You should look for stigmata of inhalational injury, which are singed nasal hairs, presence of burn around the nose, presence of burn around the mouth, wheezing, or on bronchoscopy, you will find soot in the oropharynx. We should monitor, in these patients, we should monitor arterial blood gases, carboxyhemoglobin levels. We should obtain radiographs, and bronchoscopy is the gold standard. You will see soot particles in the oropharynx. Radiographs will not show pulmonary infiltrates in the initial hours, but they should be used to monitor the progression. Management. The goal in these patients is to consider early intubation. If you see the patient is deteriorating, do not wait that patient is not maintaining saturation. Otherwise, it will be very, very difficult to intubate them. In addition to intubation and mechanical ventilation, we should also use aggressive pulmonary toilet, which includes breathing exercises, incentive spirometry, and secretion and suction to remove mucus and secretions. Bronchodilators such as ipratropium and should be used to clear secretions. That's all about management of burns. This activity was supported by this JSMU ANA. Thank you for your patient listening. If you have any queries regarding burns or this talk, you can contact me on my email address.